Hi, welcome to my kitchen. I'm here at the behest of my children. They wanted me to put together some videos of some basic cooking skills. So many people over the years have asked me to do cooking classes, but I don't think that's always very feasible with people's schedules. So we're just going to go over some basics in cooking and baking. In no way do I think I'm an expert, but I have been cooking for 40 years and I've learned some things along the way. And today we're going to be talking about beef. And I know that when I was first married and was trying to do a roast or do a pot roast or do a brisket, I didn't really understand the difference in how to cook the meats. So I have a couple of meats with me here on the counter. I've got small cuts because it's just my husband and I now. The children are gone. And I have a top round roast right here, and a top round or a bottom round, those kinds of roasts, even a rump roast, you're going to cook according to temperature. You're going to use a thermometer in the meat, and your cooking time will depend on the temperature of your meat. Here is a brisket. Now this is a small trimmed brisket. Usually in the store you'll see a brisket that's really long and it has a huge fat cap on it. But this is just one that's small and trimmed, and the way you're going to cook brisket is low and slow. And a lot of people like to smoke their brisket. My recommendation to you is always feel free to talk to the butcher at any store. They will give you tips how to cook certain meats, and then you just experiment. I've had so many disasters in my life when it came to cooking, so I understand the fear of trying something new. Today we're going to do a basic pot roast, and this is what's called a chuck roast. And a chuck roast, if you tried to oven roast this, is super tough. So what I do with a chuck roast is, this is a medium-sized chuck roast. This will feed about 4 people. I let it sit on the counter for about 30 minutes. It's really important if you're trying to brown meat, even when you're grilling, put your meat out on the counter for at least 30 minutes. Let it come up to room temperature as much as possible. It's not going to spoil in 30 or even an hour. But I put it out on the counter, and then what I do is I put it on a paper towel to dry it as much as possible to get as much of the moisture out. One way to cook this is also on a stovetop, on a low simmering heat. You can cook a chuck roast that way. Another way is through your crock pot. Go ahead and brown your meat. I like to toss my onions in, and then you can put it in a crock pot on low all day long while you're at work. Or I started using my crock pot because I had 3 children under 3 years old, and I found that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was really tough to get dinner going because kids were kind of crabby or they wanted mom's attention. So I used the crock pot. But today we're going to go ahead and use the stovetop. I'm going to start by just putting a little olive oil in my Dutch oven. The reason I'm not using butter is butter will burn faster. The milk fats in the butter will burn faster. This has a higher heat level. So I'm also going to just take some kosher salt, which has more flavor. I'm going to generously salt this meat because it seems like a lot of salt, but this meat needs a lot of flavor. And I just use some ground pepper. And then when that feels like it's really starting to smoke, I can go ahead and take this. I've already dried it, and I will put it salt side down in here, and it will take a couple of minutes to brown. I'm going to go ahead and salt and pepper. Now, having that come to room temperature, if I had just taken that right from the fridge and put it right into the pot, it would steam more than it would brown. And so even when you're grilling, like I said, or trying to brown your meat before you're going to long cook it, make sure that temperature is a little warmer because the inside of the meat will be so cold it'll just steam. Once you see the meat start smoking your pan, you can see how it's beginning to brown around the edges. The reason I choose to use a Dutch oven is because it holds the heat really hot. The inside of this Dutch oven is cast iron, so it really helps to make it sear really fast. So we're just going to let that other side brown. I'm going to take the meat out and put it on a plate and let it rest a moment while I put in some onions. Now, like I said in the beginning, this is a very basic recipe. Some people choose to add like carrots, tiny bits of carrots and celery, or garlic to flavor the meat while it's cooking. Today I'm just using Spanish onions because I want to keep it really basic. And what we're going to be doing with our roast today is I'm going to shred it, and then we're making sandwiches for later on today. Another option is to add potatoes and carrots the last hour of cooking. Take it all out, thicken it for gravy, and then you have a roast and stew and gravy. Another way you can use your chuck roast is to add spices. I have a Mexican taco pot roast recipe that I use. It adds ancho chili powder, it adds peppers, it adds cayenne pepper, it adds cumin, coriander, and that flavors the meat, and then you just shred it and put it in tacos. So there's a lot of ways you can use this meat. I'm sure it's probably done by now. Yep, it is. So I'm going to take the meat out and just leave it here, and I go ahead and stir in my sliced onions. And that oil is splattering. That's why I always wear aprons. So I just take a wooden spoon, and I'm not trying to really cook these onions. I just want them to get the salt and pepper. I'm going to add a tiny bit more salt and pepper because when you're cooking especially, you want to flavor in every step. You want to add the seasoning so it's really flavored. You can't really necessarily just add it at the end. It's not the same as having it cook in with the meats. So on the bottom of my pan, there's little bits of brown meat, and that's what gives it flavor. So what I do now is I make like a bed with my onions, and I'll put the roast back in. I'm going to use a few bay leaves. These are a dried bay leaf you'd find in your spice section. You'll be pulling those out at the end because you don't really want to eat them. They're definitely there just for flavor. Now I use a 14-ounce can of beef broth. Usually I try to use a low sodium so that I can control the amount of sodium that's in each pot roast gravy. So I add that, and then I'll add water just until it's up to the side of the beef roast. I don't want to cover it with water. I just add it just up to the side. Like that. And then I just put the lid on. Before I put it in the oven, I let it heat up till it gets to like a boiling point, so it's really hot. And then I'm going to put it in a 300-degree oven, not on a convection setting, just on a regular bake setting. And I leave it for 3.5 to 4 hours. And the way you know that it's done, it's not by temperature, it's by, if you take 2 forks and pull at the meat, it should just fall apart. Some ovens run a little hot, so I would suggest you maybe get a small oven thermometer so that you know what your oven's doing. But with this kind of meat, it's pretty forgiving. So you're just wanting to make sure you don't overdo it. So at about 3.5 hours, I would check it and see if it's really pulling and falling apart, go ahead and take it out. And then that's where you go to the next phase. Do you shred it and use au jus and make sandwiches? Or you can, like I said, make the taco meat. We use it for a lot of different things. And if you've got teenage boys, I will do 2 or 3 of these and cook them a little longer because I'm stacking them up. And then I just shred it and we just make sandwiches. And it goes a really long way for a potluck, or if somebody's moving and you need to take food to them. It's really simple to use. So this is one of our go-to meals, and when I had all my children, we have 5 kids, and when they were all small, I definitely did the crock pot version because it was just so much easier as a mom. Then all I had to do was the sides at the end or add vegetables for the last 2 hours in the crock pot. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my oven, and as you can see, I've got the rack set a little low because this is a really big Dutch oven that I bought when we had all our kids home. And I've got the temperature at 300. So we're just going to leave it in there and forget about it for 3 hours. But I do have the one that I have already done, and we'll go ahead and slice that up so I can show you what it looks like. So this one has been cooking for 4 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and take it out. I've already tested it. I know that it is ready to fall apart, and you can see what that looks like. So I might need this. Oh yeah, it's just falling apart. So this isn't a very big roast, the one I did. It's just a similar in size to the one I just did, which I think is like 2 or 3 pounds because it's just my husband and I. So I go ahead and I like to use this corian cutting board. I'm taking out the bay leaf. I love my wood cutting boards, but I love this because it's not porous. So if I have meat, raw meat, or onions or garlic, anything that's going to leave either a lot of fragrance or the whole issue of having meat on any kind of surface. So this isn't a porous surface, so it's easy for me to just put in the sink and wash. So all the onions in here are wonderful. They're all cooked. So you can leave this just as it is. You can give it a taste. But because I used the canned beef broth, it gave it a lot more flavor than just using water. If you don't have beef broth, you can use just water, but you're going to have to season quite a bit at the end. And you can do things according to your own taste. So what I do is I go ahead and start separating the meat. But with a chuck roast, one of the wonderful things about chuck roast is it has a lot of fat, which makes the meat so tender. As you can see, it is just falling apart. So it's so yummy and so moist, but I like to get all the fat off. I'm just one of those people that just does not like fat. So I trim it all off, and then as I'm going, I can just put it right back into the broth that's in the bottom of the pan. And like I said, you can thicken this and make a gravy out of it. You can serve that over twice baked potatoes if you want to, or egg noodles, which would be delicious. But like I said, today it's just going to go on sandwiches here. So that's really it. This is the proper way to cook a pot roast. So anybody can do it. It's easy. Remember, cooking is actually a science. Chemicals working together. Cooking is a little less precise than baking. Baking, you have to follow the recipe because they've balanced out the leavening and the flour and all the things that are going to make a dessert light and fluffy. But when you're cooking, you can experiment a little bit. But my recommendation is if you're a new cook, follow the recipe until you kind of get a handle on it and then add to it as you get older. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. I've made so many mistakes. That's why I can tell you things not to do, because I've already done them. My mother was a cook. I grew up with a mom that cooked. And by the time I was 12, we had to know how to make a dinner. And it was a simple dinner, but encourage your kids to get into the kitchen with you. Encourage the family at least 4 times a week to sit down to dinner together. I know we have busy schedules, especially once they're teenagers, but so much happens at the dinner table. It was always really important to us as a family to eat dinner together. It didn't mean we could do it every night, but we did it as much as possible because that's where you talk, that's where you find out where your kids are at. I think if I was to give any parenting advice to any parents is just pay attention. Be there, be present with your kids. None of us are going to get it 100% right, but being there and being present at the dinner table is a huge step forward for a family. So give this roast a try. And remember, always ask your butcher. They'll give you a lot of help. So many sources that you can go to. Pinterest, the Food Network is wonderful. All sorts of places you can go to get information on cooking. YouTube. Thank you for coming to my kitchen. I hope you've learned something today, and I hope you enjoy yourself in the kitchen next time. Thanks.